Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the 2020 Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health, ASPPH, virtual annual meeting. Our presentation today is Navigating Stigma and Addressing Peer Aggression, Harassment, Discrimination, and Exclusion for Queer and Trans-Spectrum Students and Faculty. My name is Monica Statler, and I am the Director of Graduate Training Programs here at ASPPH, and I also serve as lead staff for the ASPPH Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to announce that shortly after the conclusion of this session, the recording will be available on the ASPPH website. We encourage everyone who is certified in public health to take advantage of the 1 hour of continuing education credits conferred by this webinar. We also ask your assistance in filling out a short evaluation upon completion of the webinar. The survey link will appear automatically in your internet browser at the end. Using the question and answer mechanism shown here, you may ask questions or submit comments in writing anytime during the webinar. Simply click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and type your question into the pop-up box. We are eager to hear your ideas, reactions, and questions. Our moderator for today's event is Dr. Craig Blakely. Dr. Blakely is Dean of the University of Louisville School of Public Health and Information Sciences. Please join me in welcoming Dean Blakely.
Hello all, and thank you for joining. I'm very pleased to moderate this session. Monica, I'm happy to have this opportunity to monitor this session on navigating stigma and addressing peer aggression, harassment, discrimination, and exclusion for queer and trans spectrum students and faculty. I appreciate the fact that ASPPH recognizes the work that both my wife and I have been doing for a couple of decades as strong advocates for the LGBTQ community. We've been engaged in a number of activities here at the University of Louisville the last 7 years, including some events that have raised 5-digit kind of funds for the centers that are on both the main campus and the Health Science Center campus here at the University of Louisville. I'm very proud of the fact that U of L really recognizes this segment of our population as another dimension, critical dimension in the diversity spectrum that needs the attention of both our university and all of us affiliated with ASPPH and of the population health persuasion. We were named the LGBT Allies of the Year last year, something that we're both, again, very proud of. And so I'm always happy to support dialogue of this nature and look forward to all 4 presentations and then the discussion that will follow. I want a quick note what the learning objectives of the session are. 2 principal points. One is to explore the challenges of peer aggression, harassment, and discrimination that LGBTQ plus students and faculty face. And then also to identify strategies to overcome transgressions against the LGBTQ community and build respectful and safe learning and working environments. ASPPH has long been committed to taking steps to ensure that the cultures of all ASPPH member schools and programs of public health will be free from any forms of harassment and discrimination. This session provides an opportunity for members of the academic public health community to explore how transgressions against this LGBTQ community have been addressed, lessons learned, and explore approaches to foster a climate that respects and welcomes people of all sexual and gender identities. For more information, I would encourage everyone to visit the ASPPH Statement of Commitment to Zero Tolerance of Harassment and Discrimination. It's readily available on the ASPPH website. I would now like to introduce our panelists in the order of their presentation. And I will introduce all 4 of them now, allowing us to quickly step between each of the sessions. First, Dr. Ted Gideons. He is an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Population Health and Disease Prevention at the University of California, Irvine's program in public health. Next will be Caleb Losciviano, a doctoral student and research assistant at the Center for Health, Identity, Behavior, and Prevention Studies at the Rutgers School of Public Health. Next will be Zion Brooks, who is a program coordinator at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Louisville Health Science Center. And finally, Dr. Tiffany Dyer, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Maryland School of Public Health. After Tiffany is done, we'll go ahead and submit questions. You've heard a slide introducing all that. So now I would like to go ahead and turn the control of the session over to Ted. Ted, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I now realize how long my beard used to be before I had to start cutting my hair myself. So as mentioned, let's see if I can, I'm trying to, there it is. Okay, so let's go back just a little bit. So I called this Stick, Stones, and Syllabi to harken back to that old, completely untrue phrase that, you know, a parent may have said to you, or someone, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Well, words hurt you a lot more ultimately because they stick. Sticks and stones may actually, you know, if you get hit by a stick, you'll probably heal pretty quickly. The words actually last a lot longer. And syllabi can do a pretty bad job in very subtle ways. And I want to talk about syllabi and other things writ large. So one of the things that come up a lot when I talk about these issues is how do we actually survive being queer kids, queer adults, whether or not we are whatever letter we are in our spectrum, LGBTQI, et cetera. It's really not easy, and the survival is and thriving is not easy. But some of us do it, and we do it all in different ways. I will say that I was extremely lucky. Things were a lot easier for me than for a lot of people, and some of it is pure, yes, sure, privilege. And I think that, you know, whether it's growing up in a particular household with a particular income, but some of it was not luck, and I'll explain what I mean. I like to talk about my godmother that's there on her right, and that's her daughter Becky on the left, Nadja Gould. You could call her manipulative, and I would say that manipulative in a very, very good way. So she figured out very early on, probably before I really did, that I was gay, and she happened to, for whatever luck, was a social worker at the college that I ended up going to. And what she did was, when she found out that I got in, she made sure that I had very gay affirming resident assistant. And this is Michael Middleton, who was then an assistant dean of freshmen and had a floor of freshmen that he advised. And Mike is to this day probably the most empathic person I've ever met. He was a tremendous mentor. He is now the dean of the School of Education at Hunter College, because it's been almost 25 years. And I learned a lot from him. So between Nadja and Mike, I had this sort of this soft landing, and they did it very deliberately. I didn't know part of it. Mike finally told me about 10 years ago that's what happened. But it was incredibly important that these very specific people were looking out for me. But there were also professors there. And so that's Norman Brayson. He's an art history professor. And he was fabulous in a very specific way. So the first day of class, he got up there and was talking about Fragonard and paint, and he wore a purple suit. It was a purple leather suit. I couldn't find a picture of him in purple leather, so I colorized that photograph for you. And it wasn't just that he was amazing, but that he was out and that his syllabus was out. And it wasn't just him, it was multiple people. It was people like Marjorie Garber, another professor who was very out and taught and queered her syllabus for us. So these things it wasn't chance. You know, some of these things are luck, like just ending up in be a place where these people can help. But these were people, gay people, who proactively were helping LGBT plus students. Nadja didn't just do it for me, she did it for lots of the students. She advised a peer counseling group that was focused on sex and sexuality that I ended up joining. Actually, Becky, her daughter, also queer, did the similar things. Mike did that sort of stuff. Norman did that. Norman ended up being on my PhD committee many years later. Marge Garber did it as well. So these professors were up there modeling acceptance, not just that tolerance and that awareness that we used to talk about all the time in the 80s. Like, we need to be tolerant, we need to be aware. This was about acceptance. This was about teaching people within those classes, not just saying, I'm up here being this sort of person, but I'm also going to teach you in these syllabus, in these curriculum, what it means to accept people and to be accepted. Sorry, I didn't mean to go all, oh, there I did. So administrators also made sure those resources were there. They were advertised, they were accessible. Like, that peer counseling group actually was advertised everywhere. I saw it, and that's why I joined. So how will you create the environment? And that's a picture of Michel Foucault and his cat Insanity. That's actually the cat's name. And Norman was the first person to teach me Foucault. And I didn't realize how important it would be till later, but one of the things that you learn through Foucault is how power is communicated, how it's disrupted, and how it's directed through discourse. So the way that we talk about things really transforms the situation. So the power relations that are in the classroom that sort of emanate beyond that are really important. And so I'm going to talk about ways that, as a professor now, how do I communicate that? What are the things that I'm trying to do to be that model, to disrupt these things, to teach people new ways of thinking? So make sure that we are included in the curriculum. That means that the L, the G, the T, everyone in that, we're all there. So not just that we are like listed in a list, but that we have specific healthcare needs, we have specific disparities. I've constantly been amazed, because I thought by this point everyone got their education in medical school and learned these things, but I've had situations where I asked my doctor my blood type, a young doctor, he's younger than me, in his early 40s, and he was like, well, just go to the Red Cross and they'll tell you. And I was like, I'm not allowed to give blood, even at this point, when they've changed it just last weeks ago. He was like, you're not? And I'm like, how do you not know this? Or the 30-year-old RN at an emergency room who thought that my being on PrEP meant that I had HIV. And I was like, why do you not know these things? These things need to be taught. So it is essential that we have inclusive curriculums. This just happened just a few days ago at UCI, adding LGBT focus to ND training. We have to have specific classes, modules within classes. That these are not, it's not just HIV and substance abuse that we experience, but things like minority stress. We need to highlight the intersectionality of identities and experiences, both the harmful things and the protective things. Why are we able to do these to survive? But these inclusive curriculums also have secondary benefits. They not only are teaching people how these things are important, but it supports the integration, the acknowledgement, acceptance of the faculty, staff, and students, so that we know that we are supporting each other. And it also teaches these students how to pay forward to the next generation what they learn, which is what I'm trying to do now. So querying your syllabus is really important. The syllabus is a contract, is what we say all the time. People are like, stop calling it a contract. Well, it's not a legal contract, it's a social contract. We set out rules, we communicate expectations, and we create norms. And there are things simply within the syllabus, but the way that we communicate that syllabus in the classroom that does that. So the simplest thing that we try to get everyone to do now is just include your pronouns. So this is a very, very small, it's just a sentence, but it communicates to the LGBT, particularly the T students, that we know that you're there and that we care. It also makes everyone else think, oh, that's a thing I have to think about. And it's a small thing, but it's what that microphysics of power that we learn from Foucault that can change stuff. Making sure that you're including lectures and readings about these topics by authors in varied formats. So like, for instance, this article from several years ago, I don't use it to talk about psychological well-being. I use it to teach how to write an abstract. So I just used something about same-sex parenting to teach abstracts. It's these little tiny things that we can do. So for instance, using LGBT people in mundane examples, not just on examples about LGBT people. Also, if you can, use yourself. Not everyone is comfortable, not everyone is queer, but if you are, it is an incredibly powerful thing to be up there and to tell your students these things about yourself, to provide models, to provide things to look up to, and to be really open. I will mentor you. You don't have to do this, but it is incredibly effective if you do it. And I will say, there's pedagogy that's very important. And I use whether it is passive stuff, like bringing a speaker, as I did, to talk about HPV screening in gay men, whether it is making sure that you have a panels that include gay people or queer people, as I do in my HIV classes, using these things like the examples of using a lesbian couple in a biostats problem. There's also really active things where you actually put the students in the position. So it is role playing with gender unspecific or specific LGBT roles. These are role playing things I use for an HIV class where we use spouse A instead of husband and wife. I sent students out looking for all gender bathrooms in a scavenger hunt of public health, of things that we build in public health for my intro class. Find this thing, find that thing, and I included that. And in randomly assigned paper topics, you could have ended up with an issue, trans healthcare activism as something to write about, just as easily as you could have if it was a yellow fever outbreak, but including these samples. But I want to, acknowledge this isn't easy. Minority stress is a real thing, not just for your students, but for us. So LGBT students need our help. They suffer quietly, but we also need to do it. I often feel in my department, I'm the only gay in the village, just like poor guy in Little Britain. It can be really exhausting. So one way that we can do it is actually acknowledge it. We need to organize around with each other. Collective self-efficacy is protective, empowering, and essential. And these particular kinds of sessions do that. We are actually creating that community that makes it easier. And I'm sure I went over, but I'm done. Thank you. See if it goes to the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Forgot to unmute there. Ted, appreciate it. You can pop questions into the question folder if you care to. We'll now go ahead and move on and ask our doctoral student, Caleb, to share some comments with us.
Hey, everyone. My name is Caleb. I am a doctoral student at Rutgers University School of Public Health, and I'm here today to talk about creating inclusive institutions for transgender students and faculty. So as you heard about earlier, we're talking today about navigating stigma and addressing peer aggression, harassment, discrimination, and exclusion. And we also talked about ASPPH's statement of commitment to zero tolerance of harassment and discrimination. And these statements and these topics are really important. However, it's not enough to talk about just addressing acts of harassment and discrimination without creating environments that are conducive to an overall cultural change. Right, so if we're trying to address specific, unique acts of harassment or discrimination in an environment that's not inclusive, that's not supportive, we're just gonna be playing whack-a-mole where these events just continue to take place. And when you're trying to support people by only addressing harassment or discrimination or stigma when specific events happen and not working to create an inclusive environment, it ends up feeling a lot like this. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about how to create more inclusive environments for trans students and faculty, or trans people in general in any environment, is gender inclusive restrooms. This is like a visibly gendered space that's pretty much anywhere in public spaces. It's a super hot topic, and for schools and universities in particular, gender inclusive restrooms are really important, especially when you have students who are going to lots of different classes. Students often will avoid going to the bathroom. Oh gosh, that's a delivery. Students will either avoid going to the bathroom and end up with like kidney stones or urinary tract infections, or they'll be forced to go to bathrooms that don't fit their identity and end up with a lot of mental distress. So gender inclusive restrooms are really important. And this can also be a really great space to partner with other student faculty interest areas, I guess. So working with students, oh my God, working with students with disabilities, working with faculty who have children who might need to return to the office. So there are a lot of issues that can be wrapped up into this to create a more inclusive environment overall. Transgender inclusive health insurance is also a really important issue. I know both for students when they're making decisions about schools to apply to and offers to accept, this is a really important area in that decision-making process, as well as trans folks who are on the job market and searching for institutions. This is also a really important area that can make or break a decision. So both advocating to have this at your school and working to publicize this information are equally important. Another area for change is having clear guidelines for legal name change at your institution. So when people need, when trans folks legally change their name, then they have to take this court document and run around to all of these different places to get their name then change all the paperwork. And having clear guidelines that are publicly available, that are easily available, where you don't have to like go to the registrar's office and get a piece of paper to know how to go about the process. And also ensuring that the guidelines are trans specific and that they're not just for people changing their name after they got married, which is often what the case is. Equally important is having name change options for folks who have not yet legally changed their names or are not at that step in their process, or whatever the case may be. And this is particularly important right now as a lot of courts are closed. And so this already long process is going to be even further delayed for a lot of people. And also as a lot of classes are moving online and learning management systems become even more used, having a name that is your legal name and not your chosen name on that system can be especially traumatizing for folks, and especially as more and more faculty are going to be moving classes online over the summer and potentially in the fall. Having a way for students to use an alternative name in those systems is really important. As well as having an option to change their name on their email and on their IDs. And I know that a lot of schools have qualms about doing these things, but there are a lot of institutions that do this. So there is precedent and there are ways to make it happen. Inclusivity training for students and faculty is also really important. And like Ted mentioned, it's both a way to introduce this information to folks who aren't aware. So to educate students and faculty who aren't queer or trans or aren't involved in that community and don't know what's what, and also to signal to queer and trans students that your institution supports them. And also providing inclusivity training for staff in different areas that's specific to those needs. So public safety, you know, when we're thinking about addressing stigma and discrimination, and that might need to involve bringing in campus public safety to the conversation. So ensuring that they're trained in how to be trans confident and trans affirming. As well as health services, IT, and any other departments within the school where staff might need to be trained in how to deal appropriately with trans students and faculty. And this involves creating partnerships with a lot of different areas. So you might need to work with facilities to build restrooms. You might need to work with IT and the registrar to figure out how and where to implement these name change alternatives, working with public safety, working with counseling, psychological services, student health services, and also deans, administrators, faculty, students, boards of trustees. And from my personal experience working to create more trans-inclusive spaces and institutions, I've worked with all of these groups. And it's also a really great opportunity to engage these different groups of people as key stakeholders, because hopefully everyone wants the best environment for students, faculty, and staff, the most inclusive environment. And so it's an opportunity to work together, and also an opportunity to bring different groups of folks together. So you might, you know, work with, like I mentioned earlier, work with trans students and disabled students and faculty who have children to figure out the most like inclusive type of restroom to meet all of the needs as like a single use, accessible restroom with a changing table. If you're doing presentations on inclusivity for counseling, psychological services, and student health, you know, I've done a presentation that included Trans 101 and also partnered with racial and ethnic minority student groups to also do like racial sensitivity training. So it's also a great space where you can not just work to create more inclusive and accepting environments for trans students, but for other students who are marginalized and vulnerable. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. If you have any questions about this or want to talk more, oh, my formatting got a little messed up there, but you can contact me by email, Twitter, or on my website. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. So now we'll slide over to Zion and have you talk to us a little bit about what you've got going on at the University of Louisville.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ian Brooks and I work at the University of Louisville, specifically the Health Science Center and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I want to talk to you all today about an intentional space that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion created, and it's called the Hub at HSC. Through the various conversations that we had with students, faculty, and staff, it was made pretty clear that the folks that were more marginalized of center or underrepresented were definitely struggling. Their mental health was being impacted, their productivity was being impacted, as well as academics. And it was made clear that a space would be appreciated. To that end, we conducted an informal needs questionnaire, and we found that folks thought that there was a gap in resources between the campus. University of Louisville has two major campuses, it's Belknap and the Health Science Center. And a good chunk of the resources are at Belknap, such as the Peace Center, student disabilities, Women's Center, things of that nature. And even though students from Health Science campus are equally welcome to utilize those resources, they feel because of the gap that they're not meant for them. And there are some barriers to them getting to them. Definitely some isolation of marginalized identities. Folks said that they needed a place to cry and be vulnerable. And people also said that they needed rest. There was some discussion about homogenous LGBTQ spaces. I think that, we can agree that generally when we, as a society think of LGBTQ, at least as a person of color, it's generally perceived as whiteness. And that was the case for a lot of our LGBTQ students of color. And they felt that they needed a space that they felt that they had more space in. And also people were hungry, they wanted snacks. A lot of these students spend a lot of time on that campus and they definitely needed sustenance. One student said, we want to finally have a place where we can feel a sense of belonging. That has been something that has been incredibly lacking since starting at U of L Health Science campus. So the purpose of the Hub at HSC is to provide a welcoming, grounding, and supportive environment for University of Louisville HSC students, residents, faculty, and staff that experience oppression based on their intersecting identities. We opened the space officially September 13th of last year, and it was really important that the grand opening be a celebration. And this was an all hands on deck endeavor. We had a paint party. We invited offices to participate in that. We had graduate medical education, folks from the Ann Braden Center for Social Justice, the LGBTQ Center, and the Muhammad Ali Center. And things like our program director built from scratch a bench desk. Our vice president for health affairs and diversity initiatives put a beautiful stain on that desk. And so it was truly a labor of love. It was really important for us to have President Bendapudi there, and we were grateful that she was able to come, and that really, we think, helped with the validity for the need for that space. To make it all come together, different schools and offices donated food so that we had food and things from local businesses, and we also had an Amazon wish list. We still have that Amazon wish list to continue to get things for the space. So people said that they wanted the space to have the calm of a therapist office. So we were intentional when we picked out the colors. They're warm and inviting. There are things like plants, throw blankets, soft light lamps, and diffusers. Also, people can find resource binders, everything from mental health providers to gender affirming barbers, snacks and drinks. There's a TV and monitor. People can access Hulu, Netflix, Spotify, couch, beanbag chairs, study space, private space that people use for the drop-in services, specifically for the Peace Center and the International Students Organization. And yeah, so we collect data to see how students, faculty, and staff are using the space. And one student said, we just need a place to convene, support each other, and feel supported. It would be great to have our own space like that. That's not like an office. So like I said, we collect the data. So some quick numbers. Majority of the visitors spend anywhere between less than 30 minutes to 1 hour in the space. But we also have many folks that spend 2 hours in the space. Our data also shows that most of the people utilize the space for relaxation in combination with other things like getting snacks or studying. People sometimes provide, the specific reason that they use the space, and this dental student said, I use the space to nap in a dim, quiet place because I was having a tough day and a headache. And to date, we've had 158 visitors that have signed in or out of the hub at HSC. There's definitely some challenges to operating in a space like this. Maintaining the space is pretty hard, making sure that we have snacks on hand, have money to have snacks, cleaning and programming. We have done some programming. We had a vigil for the Trans Day of Remembrance for National Coming Out Day. We just had something simple. We had donuts and coffee and just an open space and invited people to come by and fellowship and just hang out. Definitely need institutional backing. That is something that would help with us being able to sustain the space financially. The space is definitely not big enough. We're filling a lot of needs with very little space. And then also, we do have folks sign in. We use an iPad for that. We only ask like 4 questions, but I think it would be nice to be able to report more on people's identity, but we're trying to strike the balance between, not wanting a cumbersome process, wanting to value and respect people's anonymity, but also having, useful data. So that is the hub at HSC. That picture there is at our grand opening where we shoved as many people into that space and had a picture taken. That's our contact info, and thanks for listening.
Zion, thank you much for your thoughts. Tiffany, if you could tell us what's going on at the University of Maryland. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, I can. Oh, I was like, I can't hear anyone, but everyone's muted.
Yes,
oh my goodness.
Yes, we're good.
Help me. Okay. Thank you so much. I want to thank my fellow panelists for bringing to the fore some of the resources that are available on your campuses, and then also some of the work that you're doing individually to make sure that we attend to the mental health stability of people in the LGBTQ community. I bring this up because I just received an email today from the Human Rights Council, and it was around the fact that during COVID-19, some of these safe spaces that we provide for our students have obviously been closed due to social distancing, and sort of brought to the fore the fact that for those of us who are doing a lot of work in this area, our students, staff, and faculty are now challenged with potentially going back home when the campus was their only safe space to families who may not be affirming their gender identity or sexual orientation. So I just want to put some vibes out there and just let everyone know that to continue the good work that we're all doing. My name is Tiffany Dyer. I am an assistant professor at the University of Maryland in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. I'm at the College Park campus. So in the University of Maryland School of Public Health. I'm also one of the core faculty members of our Prevention Research Center. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. Our Prevention Research Center is funded by the CDC, and we are the only PRC that has been funded to promote the health and well-being, the mental health and well-being of the LGBTQ+ population. And so we're very proud about that. I have a little picture here that today is May 1st. It is the first day of Mental Health Awareness Month. And the reason why this is important is because I'm going to be presenting data around stigma and discrimination and the results of such, including, unfortunately, depression, anxiety, substance use, etc. Okay. So again, most of us, we all know what stigma is, right? And we know the way that stigma plays out. It can be often either enacted, internalized, and then anticipated from people who may sit on the outskirts of what society would deem to be quote unquote normal, right? And because of stigma and discrimination, LGBTQ plus populations are at a higher risk for struggling with their mental health. So as you can see on the slide, we have transgender youth are 4 more likely than non-trans peers to experience depression, with nearly 4 times the risk. They're also more likely to experience more depressive symptoms than heterosexual peers. So our human rights campaign showed that 28% of LGBTQ youth, including 40% of trans youth, said they felt depressed most or all of the time during the previous 3 days. And so we can see that there's a high prevalence of mental health problems with our youth. 60% reported being so sad that they stopped doing things that they normally like to do. And so for those of us who do work in mental health, we know that that's one of the criteria for diagnosing depressive symptomatology, is that you're losing interest in things that once brought you joy. And as such, LGBTQ plus youth are more likely to feel suicidal, more likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. And these rates are especially high for bisexual teens as well, who may be experiencing biphobia, right? We have 1/3 of transgender youth who have seriously considered suicide, and 1 in 5 has at least made an attempt. Okay, so again, we see that some of the repercussions of experiencing stigma and discrimination are leading or causing, or at least associated with attempts of suicide. And what has been brought up by my peers on this particular panel is basic issues like restroom access have a profound effect on trans youth well-being, right? So one study showed that trans students denied access to gender-appropriate facilities on their college campuses were 45% more likely to try to take their own lives. And so things that other people may take for granted, just going to the restroom, if it's a gender non-affirming space, it can be very difficult, right, for people to just feel like they're being heard. Supportive environments at home and school help LGBTQ youth thrive. And so we've heard some of that today from the other panelists as well. So this would include strong family bonds, safe schools, and support from caring adults, okay? You heard Ted's examples of his experience with people who just affirmed, right, his space at that time. We have a study published by the JCPN, LGBTQ affirming families reported higher levels of self-esteem, overall health as well. And youth with less accepting families were more than 3 times as likely, again, to attempt suicide. So it's really important. And I bring this up again because we're in a situation now where we've had to send out youth back home to families who either didn't know that they were struggling with their gender identity, or they have a fear that once they go home, that it won't be affirmed, right? So even using the proper pronouns, parents and siblings may just not be willing to do that, and it's very depressing. Okay. And what about our adults? Same thing, right? So LGBTQ adults are more likely than others to have mental health and substance use problems as well. NISDA, of course, is a study that's data that's collected by SAMHSA, found that 1 in 3 adults experience mental illness, right? And again, according to the National Center for Transgender Equality's transgender survey, 40% of transgender adults reported serious psychological distress in the month before they took the survey, okay? So again, even as we think about the spectrum, not only in terms of LGBTQ plus people in general, but even the spectrum of from youth to adults, we see the same manifestations of dealing with stigma and discrimination. Okay. Even among adults with mental illness, LGBTQ plus adults may experience more serious symptoms, 13% having serious mental illness that substantially interfered with major life activities. Okay, so again, I don't want to, so I have a whole lot of data because that's just how I roll most of the time. But what we're finding is that there's a disproportionate number of LGBTQ plus youth and adults who are struggling with mental health, okay? And that would include substance use as well. Okay, and another slide about stigma and mental health. So stigma drives the higher rates of mental health problems for minorities, right? And so someone was talking about minority stress in general, but particularly we're talking about LGBTQ plus populations. Okay. Was that for me? I saw something, Tiffany. Okay. For LGBTQ plus populations, right? And so all of this, I have 1 minute. Okay, great. That's what it means. Okay, great. So support matters. So what are we doing at UMD? So the NIH formally recognized sexual and gender minorities as a health disparity priority population in 2016, which is great. The UMD PRC is the first and only PRC to focus on the mental health needs of LGBTQ plus populations. So what do we talk about in the PRC? Risks to mental health: stigma, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, bias and discrimination, absence of legal protections in community schools and places of employment, and we want to have an effect on and lower rates of depression and suicide, substance use and addiction, and then bullying and harassment that may come as well as a result. So we provide sources of resilience, supportive families, safe schools, neighborhoods, and housing, etc. I have like 30 seconds left. And our broader goals are to develop and evaluate culturally competent services that are provided by mental health professionals that have LGBTQ plus patients, enhance the mental health workforce competency, and then disseminate findings and tools for practitioners so that they can provide better mental health services for the LGBTQ populations that they serve. Okay, so I'll just get into this. We do campus climate surveys. We provide safe spaces, gender neutral restrooms, faculty mentors who represent the population for students, staff, and other faculty, and then cross-campus collaborations with their LGBT Equity Center, who also provide resources for the LGBTQ population at the University of Maryland in College Park. And that's it. This is our acknowledgements, our support from the CDC, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. Appreciate your comments. I want to remind everyone that you've got a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can send in questions that I can then share with the panelists. We've got a couple here so far. I'll take liberty and toss out the first one, given where we are these days. I'd like any or all of you to comment on this one. So here we are in this really unusual public health moment with the COVID pandemic facing all of us. So let's think about higher education and teaching at a distance and all the things that we're doing differently right now. First question is, what are some really prominent things that each of you think are really differentially impacting our students in ways that go beyond everything that you've been talking about so far, or amplify those things because of the pandemic? And then what are the kinds of things that we as faculty or administrators or colleagues as students might do to try and ease that challenge? Any of you can jump in.
So I'll just go first a little bit, because I kind of spoke on that a little bit, that now we're challenged with students who, for whom being on college campuses or just in school in general provided a safe space. This, for some students, was the only place where they had faculty and staff who could provide sources of support and spaces, safe spaces for them as well. So it does provide an additional challenge. I think as faculty and staff, one thing that we might be able to do, and I'm hoping, I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine some of the panelists might also be doing this, especially the people in Louisville at the Hub, is maybe providing, I mean, we're all sick of Zoom meetings and you know, WebEx and things, but maybe not right this moment though. But so maybe providing support in that way. I know it's difficult for people who are at home who might not want to be overheard with people at home who may not know that they are transitioning or dealing with other gender and sexual orientation. things that their family might not be aware of. But I think that's one thing that we can do, is just provide a face of love and comfort and something familiar with students who don't see us anymore.
Yeah, to go off of what Tiffany was saying, we definitely have been, sharing resources. There's been like a lot of really great community resources here, and I, share that with the mailing list of folks that go to the hub. And so one of those things is that, nearby Spalding University, they have a Center for Behavioral Health. And, they sent out a message saying like, hey, we're doing like telehealth and we're doing it on a sliding scale. Our wait time is incredibly low. So I just sent that out yesterday. I was just like, hey, here's to all the students. One of the other things too is an organization here called the Louisville Pride Foundation, which I'm a board member of. We just started doing something called Digital Pride, because basically Pride is canceled. And so, Digital Pride, every week there's a special community conversation. The first one that we had was on Trans Day of Visibility. And then, there's also weekly drag shows. So I've been, putting that information out, to the students as well. So that's something that they can watch on their phone because it's on Facebook and it's live, or they can watch it later because it's recorded. So, ways to kind of keep them engaged and let them know that they're still supported.
Anyone else want to? Oh, go ahead, Ted.
So there's one thing that comes up a lot, and I just, in the 15 minutes I allow myself to look at Twitter this morning, there was a brouhaha about really just unbelievably bad professor behavior, and being lacking any empathy for what's going on. And this was particularly just about a death in the family and one thing, but there was, this happens in multiple places. And so one thing that I've been doing, and that our Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education has been really advocating, and is being as flexible as humanly possible. So I have, and I say, if there are, and I keep saying, it's like, if there are things, let us know, and we will give you extensions. And normally in most of my classes, no extensions, but now I'm just like, whatever, it's fine, doesn't harm us. So and honestly, as it turns out, just saying we will be flexible, that sentence creates emails saying, thank you for just pointing that out. So there are very, very simple little things. It's like, we say the basic things about, this is just saying that you actually care that people are struggling is huge. And this is something that every single person can do. You have to follow it up, of course. You have to actually do something and respond to the emails. But these are really important. The flexibility and admitting that and you don't just have to be someone who's having a death in the family. The amount of stress that we're going on, even if things are easy is really important. So I think that that's something that I keep trying to, tell other faculty to do, and, have a heart, basically.
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing. I have been seeing a lot of horror stories from professors, and everything from surely all of you can't have dead family members, to being really inflexible with needs for students who are observing Ramadan, and just awful behavior. And I think especially because LGBTQ students are going to be significantly more likely to be dealing with mental health struggles, to be going to potentially unsafe or unaffirming home environments as schools have kicked the students out. It's especially necessary to be flexible and understanding and compassionate for those students.
Okay, thank you. And while you're on, Caleb, this question is pointed your way, though I'm confident that the other three will have some thoughts as well. But you made a point about a coordinated effort to address the needs of students. I wonder if we could speak a little bit more to ways in which higher level university administration might support LGBTQ staff and administrators, and thus better enable them to meet the needs of our students.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I know often these conversations focus on what can we do for students and leave out faculty and staff. And so I wanted to do my best to talk about those things. And I think a lot of the changes that support students will also end up supporting faculty and staff. So things like gender inclusive restrooms, trans inclusive health insurance policies, inclusivity trainings that create a more overall inclusive culture. Those are all really important.
Let me tweak it a bit for you, because I think the nature of the question was, you're all talking about things on the ground that are there to help students at our campuses. And I think the impetus of the question is, how can we get to senior leadership at the university and make sure that they are doing things that help support that effort that's already in play?
Yeah, one of the things that I've done when I've been part of that advocacy work was like getting in the door however I can, which as a student meant like lots of emails. You know, if you know someone who has a meeting with some kind of dean or higher level person, like talk to them about getting that conversation in there. I know a lot of schools will have like, you know, our, like at Rutgers, we have our dean, Perry Halkitis, will have Perry's Power Hour, where it's like an opportunity to have a conversation with the dean. And so if your school has, you know, if there's an open office hours or something like that, like getting in the room, showing up and just bringing that conversation up as much as possible. That's what's worked for me. I don't know if the rest of you have thoughts or ideas.
It looks like you're poised here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say invite them to your events. Like even if they don't come, like still continue to invite them. So like, I mean, for our open house, I didn't know if President Bendaputi would come or not, but I was like, I'm gonna email her and see what happens. You know, so definitely inviting folks to the events, because then, you know, like that, I think, you know, puts you on their radar, so that when you know, ask for money, it's not a surprise, or it puts you on their radar, and they say, oh, hey, like these people could really use some money or some support.
All right, let me toss out another question. How do you bridge between instruction and practice experience so that students can learn as a professional experience as well? Are there any best practice thoughts there?
I'll just jump in. So I teach the public health practicum for our undergrads, and we have 1,400 undergrads. So it's about 150 every single quarter. And one thing that I, in the day that I specifically talk about networking and mentoring is, and you know, sometimes it's people don't want to say this, but I say, look, every single one of you has an identity, and trust me, there's a public health organization around that identity. You can find them, say hi, and reach out to them. And I think that's one way of doing it, but it could be, I've also said, you know, ways to practice. So organizing those things, I did that when I was a first year grad student, my PhD student. I wandered into the LGBT anthropology group, and just because I was like, well, I assume they'll be, you know, nice. Well, what it was is that they were incredibly kind, probably kinder than any section of the anthropology AAA that I'd ever witnessed. But what they did was the people in that organization want to be the mentors. That's why they're there. So you show up and they want to help you. And that is something that is really important. So finding those people, you know, harnessing the community that's already there that wants to mentor. You know, and you can do double things. One of the things I say is like, if you're worried about being interviewing, do informational interviews where there's no stakes other than having a conversation and you get used to talking about these things. But do that with, you know, if you're queer, find those queer people that do informational interviews. This was incredibly important to me. I definitely say that my queer network was much more important to every single job I've ever gotten than any other credential that I've ever had. And it's been those people, by seeking that out and making that commonality, that's been really important.
All right, let me try another one for you. I'm going to paraphrase this one just a little bit. So all of our institutions exist in communities. we obviously can get holed up in this ivory tower and get focused on everything that's internal to the institution, and that's more than enough to keep us busy. But as I say, we exist in our communities. I wonder how suggestions you might make on the efforts that we're doing on our campuses. How can we more broadly engage the outside community in ways that are helpful, again, to our students in particular?
I think for me, I think community service is a really good way to engage community. One of the responsibilities that I have in my office is we have a scholarship program called the Health and Social Justice Scholars. And, part of their curriculum is that they do a community service project. And oftentimes we, try to connect them with different organizations that are doing different things. And, oftentimes it is one of the LGBTQ organizations, that, we encourage them if they don't have a project to create one with that organization. So definitely I think that helps for things to be mutually beneficial, then people in the community are getting help and service, and then students are, learning the importance of engaging with community.
Thanks. So one of the things that we're doing at our PRC as well is engaging the community, obviously the outside community. So we've got an advisory board that represent any number of levels of educational levels, and et cetera. And then also we are trying to really do some cross-campus collaborations, that's what we're calling it, so that we make sure that all of the needs of students, staff, and faculty are met in some fashion by all of our organizations on campus, and that there might be some repetition, right? So that there's not a lot of overlap, so that we're actually meeting people in different spaces. I think one thing that does for our campus community is lets them know that we care, but then that other people care as well, right? So it's one thing to be in an organization that reaches out in these efforts, and it's another to say, look, we also have people in the community with whom we're working who are also going to be able to meet you where meet your needs once you step off of this campus. So at least letting students, staff, and faculty know who these people are, what they represent, where they are, and how they can just access them. And it kind of goes back to what Ted was saying, and just saying, hey, we care. It's like we care, people care, and you're not by yourself. And I think that helps our students, staff, and faculty know that it's not just a thing that we're doing, but that it's something that we're passionate about.
I'll add too that, harness we're public health. So we actually do most of our MPHs, and if we have undergrads, they have to do practice. So use those organizations, make sure that you are, one, affirming, so don't, they have to abide by, and interview them, but also find the organizations that are doing that kind of, that queer-based work in your community, and bring them in as practice sites. That creates a place where your students can go to learn, it's instant mentorship, but it also, it brings them closer into the community and creates those relationships. And we have, you can imagine with 1,500, 1,400 majors, and there's a lot of those. But I'm always impressed when our curriculum coordinator finds another really amazing, a center for, for homeless queer kids, or, these things that we have great places to put this. So every community needs that. And it also helps the community providing free labor. So, that I highly recommend that.
Let me just ask if any of you have a 1 or 2 sentence wrap up comment you're dying to make. Okay, if not, I'll take that on. These are challenging times for all of us in public health. Diversity is a multiplier on every dimension you can think of, and we all need to be overly cognizant of that. I want to thank each of you for putting some thoughts together and sharing them with us today. I want to also make it known to everyone on board that we appreciate your joining in. A recording of this webinar will be available shortly on the ASPPH website. And additionally, since the coronavirus disease was declared a public health emergency, ASPPH and our members, the schools and programs of public health, have been collaborating with the public health departments and other community partners to respond to the pandemic. ASPPH has launched this hub to share information and resources. In addition, the ASPPH weekly newsletter, the Friday letter, is now featured in the latest news and about the novel, featuring the latest news about the novel coronavirus. It's a challenging time, as you know. Stay with it, be healthy, be safe. As we close out the session, please take a moment to complete a very brief session survey. Zoom will display it on your web browser. Finally displayed here are the virtual annual meeting sessions coming up next week. The final session of the day, the upcoming virtual annual meeting sessions, first session of the day, which you can learn more about on the ASPPH website, so please go check in there. And finally, again, let me thank the 4 panelists for sharing your thoughts, and those of you that have joined in today, have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.